The laugh came first. Sharp, sudden, careless. It didn't sound cruel at first, just surprised. Like she tripped over a joke she didn't expect to find funny. But once it was out there, hanging between us in the dim light of the bedroom, it changed the air completely. I remember staring at the ceiling and thinking, with strange clarity, that this was one of those moments people talk about years later and say, that's when everything shifted. It was almost 2 in the morning. The city outside our apartment was quiet in that hollow, late-night way, where even traffic sounds feel tired. We had just finished arguing about something small, something forgettable. Dishes, maybe, or money, or the way she said I never really listened. The argument fizzled out like most of ours did into silence. Then she laughed. "Relax," she said after seeing my face. I didn't mean it like that, but she had meant it like something. And whatever that something was, it landed right on a part of me I'd spent years pretending didn't hurt anymore. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell. I didn't insult her back. I just got up, pulled on my jeans, grabbed my hoodie from the chair, and reached for my phone and keys. "What are you doing?" she asked, suddenly alert. "I need air," I said. My voice sounded calm, which surprised me. "At 2 in the morning?" She laughed again, softer this time, like the whole thing was ridiculous. "You're being dramatic." That word did it. Dramatic. As if I were throwing a tantrum instead of quietly trying to hold myself together. I left without another word. The hallway light flickered as I walked out, and the door clicked shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. The cold night air hit my face when I stepped outside, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing, trying to remember why my hands were shaking. We had been together for 3 years. 3 years of shared routines, inside jokes, mutual friends, and plans that always started with when. When we move, when we travel, when we're ready. She knew my insecurities, or at least I thought she did. I told her once, late at night, after too much honesty and not enough courage, about the way I'd been teased growing up. Locker rooms, comments, comparisons, the way those words stick, even when you're older and supposedly tougher. She'd listened back then. She'd even said she was sorry I went through that. So her laugh didn't feel like a random slip. It felt personal. It felt stored up somewhere and released when she was annoyed enough to stop caring. I walked for a long time, past closed shops, dark windows, and the familiar corners of our neighborhood that suddenly felt shush. Like I didn't quite belong to them anymore. I checked my phone a few times. No messages, no missed calls. Part of me wanted her to text, to apologize, to say she didn't mean it. Another part of me dreaded that message, because I wasn't sure what I'd say back. Around 4, I ended up at a 24-hour cafe near the bus station. I ordered coffee I didn't really want and sat by the window watching strangers come and go. Everyone else seemed to have a destination. I felt like I'd walked out of mine without a map. By the time the sky started to lighten, my phone finally buzzed. "Are you seriously still gone?" she wrote. "You embarrassed me by storming out. Over a joke." A joke. That word again, doing a lot of work it didn't deserve. I typed and deleted half a dozen replies. Long explanations. Short ones. Angry ones. Nothing felt right. In the end, I wrote, "I needed space. We'll talk later." She didn't answer. When I finally went back to the apartment, she was awake, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. The TV was on, muted. The silence between us felt heavier than the night before. "So," she said, "do you feel better now?" I told her how it felt. Not just the laugh, but everything it dragged up with it. The years of insecurity. The trust one thought we had. The way it hurt more because it came from her. She rolled her eyes. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough for me to notice. "You're too sensitive," she said. "I can't walk on eggshells forever." That was when something in me finally settled. Not broke, settled, like dust after a collapse. I told her I wasn't asking for eggshells. I was asking for basic respect, for the kind of care you give someone you claim to love. She said I was overreacting, that couples tease each other, that leaving in the middle of the night was immature and scary and unfair to her. I listened. I really did. And I understood why, from her side, my leaving looked extreme. But I also knew that if I'd stayed, if I'd laughed it off and swallowed it like I always used to, something worse would have happened later. Resentment, distance, Silence that never quite goes away. I packed a bag that afternoon and went to stay with a friend. The messages from her came in waves. Anger, sadness, blame, apologies that felt half-finished. Our friends got involved, as they always do. Some said I should have stayed and talked it out. Some said jokes are jokes. Others quietly told me they'd never heard her apologize without adding a but. Now, weeks later, I'm still thinking about that laugh. About the door closing behind me in the middle of the night. About how small moments can expose big truths. So here I am, asking strangers on the internet what the people in my life can't seem to agree on. Ada for leaving the house in the middle of the night after my girlfriend laughed at my size? The comments started pouring in faster than I expected. At first, I told myself I wouldn't read them. I already felt raw, stretched thin, like one more wrong sentence could snap something important inside me. But curiosity won. Or maybe I was just desperate to feel less alone in what had happened. Some people were brutally direct. Leave her. She doesn't respect you. Others were harsher in the opposite direction. You walked out over a joke? Grow up. I read every single one. What surprised me most wasn't the disagreement. It was how many strangers described feelings I had never put into words. Men talking about learning early on that they weren't allowed to be hurt by comments about their bodies. About laughing along so they wouldn't look weak. About partners who insisted teasing was harmless, even when it cut deep. For the first time since that night, I felt understood. My girlfriend didn't see it that way. The day after I posted, she showed up at my friend's place unannounced. I heard her knocking before I saw her, sharp and impatient, like she expected the door to open immediately. When it did, her expression shifted from irritation to something closer to disbelief. "So this is where you ran off to?" she said, stepping inside without being invited. I asked her to sit. She refused. "You put our business online?" she asked. "Are you serious?" I told her I needed perspective. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You needed validation. You wanted people to tell you you're right." That stung, partly because there was truth in it. But I also knew it wasn't the whole story. "I wanted to know if I was crazy," I said. "If I imagined how bad it felt." She crossed her arms, her body language already defensive. "And what did your little internet jury decide?" I told her. Not every comment, but enough. I told her people thought her laugh mattered. That intent didn't erase impact. That leaving wasn't about punishment, but self-preservation. Her face hardened. "So now I'm the villain," she said. "Great. I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," she replied. "They did." We stood there in silence, the kind that presses on your ears. I realized I'd seen this version of her before, the one who felt cornered and lashed out instead of listening. I'd always told myself it was temporary, that she'd soften once she calmed down. This time, I wasn't so sure. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said finally. "But I can't promise I'll never joke like that again. That's how I talk. That's how I joke." I nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's the problem." She stared at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. "You're really throwing everything away over this?" she asked. 3 years. I thought about all the moments that led up to that night. The small comments I ignored. The way she sometimes dismissed my feelings as insecurity instead of trying to understand them. The times I apologized just to keep the peace, even when I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong. "It's not just this," I said. "This is just the moment I stopped pretending it was." She left soon after that. No dramatic goodbye. Just a tight nod and the door closing behind her. This time I didn't follow. The weeks that followed were strange and quiet. Too quiet. I moved my things out of the apartment when she wasn't there, packing years of shared life into boxes that suddenly felt heavier than they should have. Every object carried a memory, a trip, a joke, a version of us that no longer existed. She texted sometimes. Short messages at first, then longer ones. Apologies mixed with explanations. Explanations mixed with blame. "I never thought you'd be this sensitive. I was joking, not attacking you. You leaving hurt me too." I read them all. I answered some. Others I left unread until the notification disappeared. One night, unable to sleep, I reread my original post and the update I'd added later. I barely recognized the person who wrote it. Not because he was weak, but because he was just beginning to understand his own boundaries. That realization scared me. I started therapy a month later, not because the internet told me to, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her. It was about me, about why I'd stayed quiet for so long, about why it took a laugh at 2 in the morning to make me walk out. My therapist didn't tell me who was right or wrong. She didn't need to. She asked questions instead, about childhood, about shame, about what I believed I deserved in a relationship. Those sessions were uncomfortable, sometimes exhausting, but they were honest in a way my relationship hadn't been toward the end. One afternoon, my ex asked if we could meet. Just talk. Closure, she said. I almost said no, but something told me I needed to hear it. Maybe she did too. We met at a quiet cafe. Neutral ground. She looked different. Tired, maybe, or just more real without the familiarity cushioning us. I've been thinking, she said after we ordered, about everything. I waited. I didn't realize how much that stuff mattered to you, she continued. I thought if I laughed, it would make it lighter. I didn't think it would stick. I told you it did, I said gently. I know, she replied. I just didn't know what to do with that. I didn't want to feel like the bad guy. There it was. Not an excuse. Not quite an apology either. Just honesty. I didn't leave to make you the bad guy, I said. I left because I didn't feel safe staying. Her eyes flickered at that word. Safe, she repeated. Emotionally, I added. I didn't trust that my feelings would be taken seriously. She nodded slowly. I guess I always thought you'd stay no matter what. That hurt more than the laugh ever did. I won't do that again, I said. Not as a threat, as a fact. We didn't get back together. There was no dramatic reconciliation or final argument. Just an understanding that what we needed from a partner didn't line up anymore. When I left the cafe, the air felt lighter than it had in months. Sometimes I still think about that night, about the quiet streets, the cafe by the bus station, the feeling of walking without knowing where I was going, only knowing I couldn't stay. I don't regret leaving. I regret how long it took me to believe that my pain was reason enough. So if anyone reading this is wondering whether it's wrong to walk away when someone laughs at something you trusted them with, I'll say this: you're not obligated to stay where your hurt is treated like a joke. And no matter what anyone says, choosing yourself isn't cruelty. It's clarity. Months passed quietly at first, then all at once. Life has a way of doing that when you stop bracing for impact. One day you wake up and realize the ache you carried like a second spine isn't the first thing you feel anymore. It's still there, but muted, like a distant echo instead of a constant hum. I moved into a small studio across town. It wasn't fancy. Thin walls, a radiator that hissed like it was alive, and windows that only opened halfway. But it was mine. No shared shelves. No passive-aggressive silence. No feeling like I needed to shrink parts of myself to keep the peace. The first few weeks alone were harder than I expected. I'd come home from work and instinctively reach for my phone to tell her something mundane. Then remember there was no one on the other end anymore. I'd catch myself rehearsing explanations for arguments that would never happen. That's the strange part of long relationships ending. You don't just lose the person. You lose the future conversations you were already planning. Therapy continued. Slowly, patterns started to emerge. Not just with her, but with my past. How often I minimized my own discomfort to avoid conflict. How I learned early that being agreeable felt safer than being honest. How jokes at my expense were easier to swallow than standing up and risking rejection. One session, my therapist asked me a question that stuck with me. What did leaving that night protect? I thought about it for a long time. My dignity, I said finally. Maybe my self-respect. I didn't feel strong when I left, but I think I was protecting the last part of myself that still believed I deserved better. She nodded. That's usually what boundaries do. I kept reading new comments on my post as time went on. It had grown far beyond what I expected. Thousands of people weighing in. Some updates. Some arguing with each other. Some sharing their own stories uncannily similar to mine. A message landed in my inbox one night that I couldn't ignore. It was from a guy around my age. He wrote about how his girlfriend used to mock his body in front of friends, always framed as humor. How he laughed along until one night He locked himself in the bathroom and realized he hated himself more after every joke. He said my story was the first time he'd seen someone leave instead of just endure. I sat with that for a long time. It's strange how shame thrives in silence. How easily it convinces you that your pain is unique, exaggerated, or undeserving of attention. And how quickly it dissolves when someone else names it out loud. A few months later, my ex and I ran into each other unexpectedly at a mutual friend's birthday. I almost didn't go. Something told me I should. Not for her. For me. She was already there when I arrived. Laughing. Comfortable. For a split second, my chest tightened, the old reflex flaring. Then it passed. I realized I wasn't afraid of her presence. I was afraid of the version of myself I used to be around her. We spoke briefly, polite, careful. Two people who knew each other deeply once and now knew better than to pretend that closeness still existed. "You seem different," she said at one point. "So do you," I replied, and meant it. There was no bitterness in that moment. Just distance. Healthy, earned distance. Later that night, a friend pulled me aside. "I read your post," he said quietly. "I didn't comment, but I'm glad you left." I asked him why. "Because watching you two together near the end," he said, "it felt like you were always apologizing for existing." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Maybe because I knew it was true. Time did what time always does. It softened the sharp edges. It gave me perspective I didn't have when everything felt immediate and raw. I started dating again, slowly, cautiously. Not searching for replacement or redemption. Just curiosity. On one of those early dates, sitting across from someone new, I mentioned an insecurity offhand. Nothing dramatic, just honest. She didn't laugh. She didn't deflect. She asked a question instead. "What made you feel that way?" The simplicity of it caught me off guard. I realized then how low my bar had been before. Not for love, for basic care. I didn't rush into anything serious. I didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, I felt comfortable in my own company. I wasn't measuring my worth by someone else's reactions. I wasn't waiting for permission to feel hurt. Every now and then, new comments still appear under my original post. People finding it late, arguing as if it just happened yesterday. I don't engage much anymore. The verdict doesn't matter the way it used to. But if I were to add one last update, it would be this. Leaving wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about winning an argument or making a point. It was about listening to the quiet voice inside me that said, "If you stay, you'll disappear." I learned that love without respect slowly teaches you to doubt your own pain. That laughter can be just as loud as shouting when it lands in the wrong place. And that walking away doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it means you finally stopped negotiating with your self-worth. So no, I don't think I was wrong for leaving in the middle of the night. I think that was the first moment I chose myself in the daylight, even though it happened in the dark. The ending didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded in small, almost unnoticeable moments, the kind you only recognize as important when you look back later and connect the dots. It arrived the day I deleted the last photo of us from my phone. Not in anger, not dramatically, but because I realized I no longer felt anything when I saw it. No tightness in my chest. No nostalgia sharp enough to hurt. Just recognition of a chapter that had already closed. It arrived the first time I laughed freely about myself without that familiar echo of shame following close behind. I caught my reflection in a store window one afternoon and noticed how relaxed my posture looked. I wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next comment, the next joke disguised as affection. It arrived the night I slept through without waking up to replay arguments in my head. I used to think endings were loud. Final conversations, emotional confessions, clear winners and losers. But this ending was quiet, gentle, almost respectful. Therapy eventually shifted from processing the relationship to rebuilding the parts of me that had slowly eroded while I was in it. We talked about self-trust, about intuition, about how many times I'd felt something was wrong but chose to ignore it because staying felt easier than leaving. One session, my therapist asked, "If that moment hadn't happened, the laugh, the night you walked out, how long do you think you would have stayed?" The answer came without hesitation. Too long. That truth didn't come with anger, just clarity. I stopped wondering if I had overreacted. I stopped replaying her words, trying to hear them differently. The need for justification faded. I didn't need a perfect explanation anymore. I had lived the reality of how it felt, and that was enough. Occasionally, someone new would ask about my last relationship. I learned to tell the story without defending myself, without exaggerating, without shrinking it either. I didn't frame her as cruel or myself as fragile. I just told the truth. She laughed at something I trusted her with, and when I told her it hurt, she minimized it. That's when I realized I couldn't stay. Most people understood. The ones who didn't weren't people I needed to convince. One evening, almost a year after that night, I walked past the old apartment. The lights were on. Someone else lived there now. The sight stirred something unexpected. Not sadness, but gratitude. That place held the version of me that finally chose to leave instead of endure. I thought about how close I'd come to staying, to apologizing for being hurt, to convincing myself that love meant tolerating discomfort quietly. I thought about how many people do exactly that. The final sense of closure came not from forgiveness or reconciliation, but from acceptance. Acceptance that she wasn't a villain. Acceptance that I wasn't weak. Acceptance that two people can care about each other and still cause harm. We weren't wrong for being who we were. We were wrong for each other. That distinction mattered more than I ever expected. I stopped asking whether leaving made me an asshole. The question itself belonged to an earlier version of me, one who still believed pain needed permission to exist. What I learned instead was this: you don't need to justify walking away from disrespect. You don't need to wait for cruelty to become obvious. You don't need a dramatic breaking point to honor your boundaries. Sometimes, all it takes is a single moment that reveals how someone handles your vulnerability, whether they protect it or treat it like entertainment. That laugh was small, brief, forgettable to her, maybe, but it told me everything I needed to know. And walking out into the night wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of self-recognition. That was the real ending. Not the silence after the door closed. Not the comments. Not the arguments. The ending was me, finally believing that my feelings didn't need to be earned, explained, or laughed away to matter.